There is a reason you're hearing this right now, and it is not random. It is not accidental. And it is not just another message passing through your day unnoticed, because something has shifted, not in them, but in you. And even if no words have been spoken, even if no clear explanation has been given, a part of them has already felt it, deeply, unmistakably, like something subtle yet irreversible has moved beneath the surface of what once felt stable. Before we go any further, there is something you need to hear clearly, something your mind may have questioned again and again, something you may have tried to rationalize or dismiss just to find some kind of peace. And that is this. What you felt between you was real. It was never an illusion. It was never something you invented out of loneliness. And you were never too sensitive for noticing it. Because the hardest part of this experience was never the feeling itself. It was the isolation of carrying it alone, the quiet confusion of sensing something powerful while the other person behaved as if nothing was happening at all. Maybe you have lived through moments like this, moments where they watched you but said nothing, moments where they reached out casually only to disappear again, moments where they felt close enough to touch and then suddenly distant beyond explanation. And the most confusing part was always the same. Just when you began to pull away, just when you started to reclaim yourself, they appeared again, as if something inside them reacted to your absence in ways they could not control. What you are experiencing follows a pattern, a very specific psychological pattern, and it tends to emerge when someone begins to lose emotional control over a connection they never fully understood. Because the moment you stopped chasing, the moment you stopped explaining, the moment you stopped waiting for clarity that never came, something inside them activated, not because they stopped caring, but because for the first time they felt the possibility of losing you. And that is where everything begins to change. Because when a person feels that loss approaching, their ego does not immediately allow honesty. It does not open the door and speak clearly. Instead, it protects, it distances, it creates space, not out of indifference, but out of fear, because admitting what they feel would mean surrendering control. And for someone who has built their identity around emotional independence, that surrender feels like danger. So instead of moving closer, they pull back. Instead of speaking directly, they act indirectly. And instead of owning their feelings, they begin to project them outward, often onto you. Projection is subtle but powerful, because when someone is not ready to face what they feel, they shift the emotional weight onto the other person. They make you feel like you're the one who cares too much, the one who is confused, the one who is overthinking, when in reality, they are the ones avoiding the truth that is rising inside them. Take a moment and place your hand gently on your chest, just for a second, and feel your heartbeat, because your body has known this truth long before your mind was willing to accept it. Your body felt the inconsistency, the push and pull, the emotional undercurrent that could not be explained logically, and it never lied to you. Carl Jung once described that every person carries both a persona and a shadow. The persona being the version they show to the world, the controlled, acceptable, composed version of themselves, and the shadow being everything they hide, everything they fear, everything they have not yet integrated. And when you entered their life, you did not just connect with their persona, you touched their shadow. And that is why this connection felt different. Because when someone encounters a person who reflects parts of themselves they have not faced, it creates both attraction and fear at the same time. Attraction because something feels real, deeper than surface-level interaction, and fear because that depth threatens the identity they have carefully constructed. So when you stopped chasing, when you stopped feeding the dynamic they had grown comfortable controlling, something inside them shifted, and what followed is something known as attachment panic. This is the moment where the nervous system reacts to perceived emotional loss, and it does not look like a grand confession or a dramatic return. It looks subtle, almost invisible if you're not paying attention. It looks like them checking your profile more often than they admit, watching your stories without reacting, sending short, casual messages that seem insignificant but are anything but, asking about you through others in ways that sound harmless but carry hidden urgency. Touch your wrist now and feel your pulse, because just like your heartbeat, these patterns follow a rhythm. And once you recognize it, you cannot unsee it, because something changed in you. You are no longer reaching the way you used to. You are no longer waiting in the same way. And that shift, that quiet stillness, that withdrawal of energy is what creates confusion in them, because they were used to your presence being constant. They were used to your emotional availability, being something they could rely on without effort. And now that it is gone, or rather redirected, they are forced to confront what they took for granted. Here is the truth most people do not realize. The silence you created did not push them away. It revealed something. It revealed what was already there. Because when someone truly does not care, they do not react to silence. They move on. They disengage completely. But when someone begins to reach in indirect ways, when they test, when they hover around the edges of your life without stepping fully in, it is not indifference. It is hesitation shaped by fear. And those tests, you may have noticed, those small, almost confusing interactions, they're not random. They are the closest thing to a confession that fear allows. They are attempts to answer a question they cannot ask directly. A question that sounds simple, but carries everything underneath it. Are you still there? And every time you respond calmly, every time you do not chase, every time you remain grounded in yourself, instead of falling back into old patterns, something inside them both breaks and awakens at the same time. Because part of them realizes that the version of you they depended on is no longer available in the same way. And another part of them sees, maybe for the first time, who you actually are without the need to prove yourself. But this is where the focus must shift, because this is not just about them. This is about you. Because while you were trying to understand their behavior, something deeper was happening within you, something quieter, but far more powerful. You were changing. You may not have noticed the exact moment it happened. It may not have come with a clear decision or a dramatic turning point, but slowly, almost invisibly, you began to choose yourself. You stopped checking your phone the same way. You stopped analyzing every message. You stopped trying to decode silence. You stopped making excuses for behavior that confused you. And most importantly, you stopped abandoning yourself in order to maintain a connection that was not meeting you fully. And that is not a small shift. That is transformation. Because there comes a point in every emotional journey where waiting stops feeling like love and starts feeling like loss. And when that realization settles in, something inside you reorganizes itself, not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of clarity. You begin to understand that your energy is not something to be given endlessly without reciprocity. You begin to see that your presence is not something to be assumed as permanent, and you begin to recognize that your peace matters more than any unanswered question. And that is when everything changes. Not because they suddenly become different, but because you do. And while you are moving deeper into that clarity, something else is unfolding on their side. Something they may not fully understand yet, because what they are experiencing is not just discomfort, but a deeper internal shift that feels unfamiliar and unsettling at the same time. And slowly they begin to revisit everything. Every conversation that once felt ordinary now carries weight. Every moment where they chose distance over closeness starts to return to them with a clarity they did not have before. Every time they held back instead of opening up, every time they delayed instead of choosing, every time they assumed you would remain exactly where they left you, all of it begins to rise to the surface, not all at once, but gradually, like a quiet pressure building inside their awareness until it becomes impossible to ignore. Because what they built their emotional certainty on was never stable to begin with. It was an assumption, the assumption that you would always be there, that your feelings would remain unchanged, that your patience meant permanence. And now that assumption is breaking apart. And when something built on illusion begins to collapse, it does not do so gently. It creates confusion, restlessness, and a kind of inner noise they cannot easily silence. They start to feel your absence in places they never noticed before. In quiet moments, in conversations that feel incomplete, in connections that lack something they cannot quite define, because what existed between you carried a depth that cannot be recreated through surface interactions. And now they are beginning to understand that not through logic, but through loss. They try to move forward. They try to distract themselves. They try to convince their mind that what they felt can be replaced, but nothing quite works. Not because you were perfect, but because what existed was real. And real connections leave something behind, something that does not fade simply because distance exists. And so you return to their thoughts again and again, not occasionally, but persistently at unexpected moments, in the middle of ordinary days. And it does not feel like nostalgia. It feels unfinished, like something unresolved that continues to call their attention back. And if they could speak without fear, without pride, without the defenses they have built over time, they would say things they are not yet ready to say. They would admit they were wrong, not lightly, but in a way that carries weight, in a way that recognizes every moment they chose avoidance over truth. They would say they are sorry, not casually, but with the kind of vulnerability that requires them to fully face what their choices created. And most of all, they would admit that they need you. And that is the part that unsettles them the most, because needing someone contradicts the identity they have built for themselves. It challenges the idea that they can remain detached, independent, unaffected. So instead of speaking clearly, they hesitate. Instead of moving closer, they remain at a distance. Instead of choosing directly, they stay in between. But even in that hesitation, something is happening, because the silence you created did not end the connection. It transformed it. It brought everything hidden to the surface. And while they are navigating that internal conflict, something equally important is happening within you. You are healing, not only from this connection, but from every version of yourself that once accepted less than you deserved. You're beginning to see where you confuse patience with obligation, where you equated waiting with love, where you gave more than was returned, and that awareness is changing how you move, how you respond, how you see yourself. Because healing is not just about letting go of someone else, it is about returning to yourself. And as you do that, a quiet fear may appear. The fear of being alone, the fear that if you truly release this connection, nothing else will come. The fear that this was your only chance. But that fear is not truth. It is simply the echo of uncertainty you have been living in, because being alone is not the same as being abandoned, and choosing yourself is not the same as losing love. In fact, it is the beginning of experiencing it in a more grounded and honest way. You are not empty without them. You are simply no longer distracted from yourself. And that is where your power begins. Not the power of control or reaction, but the power of self-alignment, the quiet certainty of knowing your worth without needing it confirmed, the ability to choose peace over confusion, to protect your energy instead of offering it endlessly. You're no longer someone waiting to be chosen. You're someone who chooses. And that shift changes everything, because you are not required to reopen a door simply because someone now recognizes its value. You're not obligated to return to a dynamic that once required you to diminish yourself. You're not responsible for their timing, their growth, or their realization. And if they return, let it be different. Let it be grounded in accountability, in consistency, in real change. Not just words, because words can be easy, but change is something that reveals itself over time. And if they do not return, then their absence has already given you clarity. It has shown you what was not aligned. It has revealed what you were tolerating, and it has guided you back to yourself. So either way, you're not losing, you are evolving, because the true victory here is not about whether they come back. It is about who you have become. You have stopped abandoning yourself. You have stopped organizing your life around someone else's uncertainty. You have stopped chasing validation and started living in alignment with your own value. That is the shift. That is the transformation. And that is why, regardless of what they choose next, you have already moved forward. You have already stepped into something more stable, more grounded, more real, and that cannot be undone. So take a moment now, breathe slowly, and feel where you are, not in the past, not in what could have been, but here, in the version of yourself that chose peace, the version of yourself that no longer waits in confusion, the version of yourself that understands their worth without needing it explained. You are not an option. You are not a placeholder. You are not someone waiting for a decision. You are someone who has already decided, and that decision is yourself. And from this place, everything that enters your life next will meet you differently, because you are no longer the same person who started this journey. You are clearer, stronger, more grounded, and more aligned with what you truly deserve. So whatever happens next, whether they return or remain where they are, you continue forward, not chasing, not waiting, but becoming, because that is what this was always leading you toward, not them, but you.